I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, and we are back on Unindoctrinate talking about assault on Aquarius, angels, and demons. Elvis Presley, his music, the driving force, the first driving force towards racial harmony in the United States of America. Ed Sullivan proclaiming Elvis as a fine, decent boy, a tremendous person, a very nice person. And it was both the best of times and the worst of times for Elvis Presley, because even though he was a lovable rebel leading the country out of the Ozzie and Harriet culture, he was leading us into a new beginning. And I wasn't around then, but into a new beginning of self-confidence, individual expression, and fulfillment. He was still yes, ma'am, no, sir, patriotic, a fine young boy, a very nice person. And it is my belief that Elvis Presley, with all of these things that he was leading, and quite unknowingly and unintentionally by himself, this was truly the beginning of the dawn of the age of Aquarius in the United States. And it landed Elvis Presley in the crosshairs of the Dark Lords of the New Age. And it didn't take long for the first documented salvo against a fun-loving, on top of the world Elvis and his legion of young supporters, because it was by none other than one of the, and you have to understand this, this goes to my point and premise of this is entertaining, this is fun, this is good. But the big thing is that we want to realize that they're using the same tactics they used then against us now. And it's the same players, ladies and gentlemen. And it was the New York Times, the gray lady, if you will, mainstream media, the New York Times, that first attacked Elvis Presley. Jack Gould, who was a chief television reporter and critic, and no one ever remembers his name, but we remember the name of Elvis Presley. He wrote that, and here's the expert, the chief television reporter and critic, the expert of the New York Times, the mainstream media. They were fake news even back then. Mr. Presley, wrote Jack Gould, has no discernible singing ability. His phrasing, if it can be called that, consists of stereotype variations that go with a beginner's aria in a bathtub. His one specialty is an accented movement of the body, primarily identified with the repertoire of the blonde bombshells of the burlesque runway. Well, Gould wasn't much of a critic, and he wasn't much of a poet. The New York Daily News, not to be outdone, said that popular music has reached its lowest depths, and the grunt and groin antics of Elvis Presley. He rotates his pelvis. It's suggestive, it's vulgar, it's tinged with the kind of animalism that should be confined to dives and bordellos. And it wasn't long, and keep a point of remembering where these attacks come from, mainstream media. Here comes religion. After a show in La Crosse, Wisconsin, the local Catholic diocese sent a letter to the FBI, Director J. Edgar Hoover, warning that Presley is a definite danger to the security of the United States. He rouses the sexual passions of teenage youth. More than 1,000 teenagers tried to gang into Presley's room at the auditorium, and 2 high school girls whose abdomen and thigh had Presley's autograph. Oh, how horrible these times must have been. And historian Marty Jeser summed it up when he said, as Presley set the artistic pace, other artists followed. And he said these words: Presley, more than anyone else, gave the young a belief in themselves as a distinct and unified generation, the first in America ever to feel the power of an integrated youth culture. Think of that. It's not just me coming up with these crazy ideas. A historian, Marty Jeser, said that Elvis, more than anyone else, gave the young a belief in themselves. Do you know how dangerous it is when people believe in themselves? That's what I'm trying to do. Give you a belief in yourself, to realize that we are distinct and yet unified. We're divine, we're sovereign, we're free individually. We're divine, we're sovereign, we're free collectively. And this was the first time that this had ever happened in American culture, that people began to feel the power of an integrated youth culture. It was the very first time, and you know that it did not escape the eyes of the dark empire. And it didn't take long for them to strike back. Aquarius was rising. The Dark Lords had seen enough. 2 days, ladies and gentlemen, 2 days after Ed Sullivan called Elvis a fine young man on national television, 2 days. 2 days later, the Memphis Draft Board reclassified Elvis Aaron Presley 1A, ensuring that he would be drafted very soon. And sure enough, March 24th, 1958, Presley was inducted in the U.S. Army at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. Now think about this. Here he is, the lovable rebel. Here he is making youth feel like they're a unified generation. Here he is getting people to embrace their individuality. Here he is getting people to break out of societal norms. And yet he's yes, sir, and no, sir at the same time. And I am convinced that this was the first strike by the MK Ultra, by the Tavistock, by the powers that be, because they are sitting there, you know what they're thinking? Oh, this Presley guy, the parents already don't like him. Let's draft him. He'll resist the draft. He'll burn his draft card. He won't come, and then he'll fade away. Well, not only did Elvis show up for induction, but he rejected any special status, saying, I don't want to be treated any differently from anyone else. The Army can do anything with me it wants. And the next thing they did is ship him to Germany. An obvious effort, folks. An obvious effort by the controllers to get him as far away from the minds of his loyal fans and inflict as much damage to his recording career as they possibly could. So what did Elvis do? He humbly said, yes, sir, saluted, got on the airplane. And I can't help but believe that the people that were trying to bring Elvis down, the establishment forces that had conspired to enlist Presley, this had to be a crushing shock, because no doubt they had envisioned this petulant, arrogant, belligerent Elvis Presley. And in fact, it's my belief that his enlistment was a calculated effort to provoke a reaction that would go a long way towards destroying his credibility. But instead, folks, the plan backfired. The teenagers still loved Elvis. The kids still loved Elvis. The young adults still loved Elvis. But now, the adults began to love Elvis. They used to be hostile to him, but now they saw him as Ed Sullivan saw him, as a loyal American soldier, maintaining his credibility with youth, continuing to be himself, and yet showing himself to be a loyal, devoted American soldier. The Dark Lords, folks, were stunned. Unfortunately, though, they were just getting started. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty. This is Unindoctrinate, and I encourage you to go to jeffreydaugherty.com and click on the American flag logo. That's for my friends at Hero Soap. And if you're going to take a bath, if you're going to take a shower, and let's hope that most of you are, you might as well do it with organic soap, the best soaps there are, and you might as well support veterans while you do it. Hero Soap, jeffreydaugherty.com, click on the American flag logo, let freedom clean. So Presley had stunned the elite by accepting his draft. He was drafted at the height of his fame And not only his fame, but a fame they'd never seen before. They thought they had him. They thought they were going to take him down. But no, Elvis retained his integrity, and he decided that he was going to turn it out for good. And their plan was in trouble, folks. Their plan was in trouble. If Elvis got through his 2-year stint in the Army, like he was, the trooper, this whole thing was going to blow up in their faces. The over 30 crowd that hated him now loved him. They'd taken him to Germany. That didn't work. They enlisted him. That didn't work. And now they had to expand the plan to dethrone Elvis Presley, because what they tried to do only extended the borders of the king. So then what happened? This is where it really gets sad. This is where it really gets dark. And this is where we really need to start listening and understanding that we're seeing the same things repeated here in 2019 and into 2020 and beyond. The MK Tavistock program doesn't just pick people randomly. The MK Ultra / Tavistock mind control, it probes the mind. It probes the psyche. It probes the spiritual makeup of its targets. And it's my belief that after Elvis survived the induction into the Army and survived the being stationed over in Germany, that the mind control program really went after him. They set their full focus on Elvis after the induction into the Army failed to break him. And you don't have to be that great of a mind prober to discover that Elvis gained much of his spiritual and mental strength from his mother. They had an unusually strong bond. Everyone I know that was close to Elvis said that his mother was his physical, mental, and spiritual strength. And I believe that MK Ultra Tavistock identified this, and they made the disgusting, dark decision to go after his mother, Gladys Presley. As sad as that is, that's what the record shows, I believe, happened. Gladys loved Presley, was said to have had an uncanny sixth sense about Elvis. One time while they were on tour, Elvis's car caught fire. Nobody knew this. This was back before 24/7 media. And Elvis makes his normal daily call to his mama, and she told him that she'd seen him surrounded by fire. Somehow, she knew that he had been surrounded by fire. Occurrences like this were very frequent. Now, I've spent almost 40 years now of my life studying spirituality, and my studies have ranged from the ultra-Orthodox Pentecostalism to the wildest, and most far-flung frontiers of this cultural spirituality that we find ourselves in today. And I really believe, even though I didn't know Gladys, I've talked to people that knew Gladys, that she was a woman with deep spiritual gifts, and she was actually a talented empath and probably a remote viewer, at least where Elvis was concerned. And I researched this book that I wrote, and I came across another fascinating fact about Mrs. Presley, and it was quite by accident, but if you saw pictures of Madame Blavatsky and pictures of Gladys Presley, you might think that you were looking at the same woman. Interesting, very fascinating to me. And if you go over to the YouTube channel, ladies and gentlemen, the Christian Whistleblower YouTube, if you go over to that, you'll be able to see pictures of Gladys Presley and Madame Blavatsky. I'm going to go ahead and share those right now so that they will be on the video in the chat room over at Christian Whistleblower YouTube. On the left, Madame Blavatsky. On the right, Gladys Presley. And I just have the thought knocking at my mind's door. Could Elvis's mother have been Madame Blavatsky in a former life? Just a question, not anything I'm asserting. Just a very, very interesting question to me. But Gladys would always go out of her way to make certain that she was happy, she was upbeat, she was positive. Elvis could be at times moody. You know, he could fall into depressions. She wouldn't let her boy be dragged down. She was his rock. And getting Elvis physically away from Gladys because of this became job one for the mind control cabal. I believe that's why they drafted Elvis into the Army, one of the big reasons. That's why they sent him over to Germany, was an inside job to accomplish this. But when you have this, and some of you know this, when you have this deep and this powerful of a psycho-spiritual connection, distance doesn't necessarily even have as much of a hindrance as people would think that it would. I mean, these are two people that one would forget what they were saying, the other would finish the sentence. But the diabolical plan to break down Gladys Presley by separating her from her son did begin to work almost immediately as soon as Elvis left for Germany. And I learned this from Charlie Hodge, Elvis's longtime friend. As soon as Elvis left, Gladys fell into a deep depression. As soon as he left, she started to drink heavily. And she started to put on a lot of weight. She started taking diet pills to try to counteract that. She was suffering from bloating. She was suffering from depression. And she was also terrified about Elvis being in the military. And all of this was a rapid, caused a rapid deterioration of Mrs. Presley's health. And she developed a very aggressive form of hepatitis. I've talked to some doctors. I've done a lot of research. And the rapid ravaging of her body by this hepatitis is unforeseen in medical journals. The hepatitis was too aggressive. It took her too fast. And recent discoveries about the ability and proficiency of these intelligence agencies to afflict debilitating diseases and individuals upon and illnesses upon individuals just makes me wonder, was the rapid decline of Gladys Presley just because she was away from Elvis? Or was there some dark technology that was applied to Gladys Presley to make her get so sick so fast? I don't know, but when you look at what's being done today, you can't help but ask the question. And on August 14th of 1958, Elvis was in Germany, became highly agitated concerning his mother. He thought something was terribly wrong. He finally got a phone call through to Memphis. And his daddy said, "Elvis, your mama's gone. She's dead." Elvis physically collapsed. It took several hours to revive him. And even though that distance from Memphis to Germany, Elvis had experienced a premonition about the death of his mother. And the Dark Lords had landed their blow. Elvis entered into a prolonged period of grief, and those closest to him believe that he never fully recovered from it, including Charlie Hodge, J.D. Sumner, James Burton, men that I know that knew Elvis better than anybody. Elvis used to say of his mother, "She's all I ever lived for. She was always my best girl." But being the dutiful son, Elvis did make sure that his mother's favorite gospel quartet, the Blackwood Brothers, sang at her funeral. And before she was buried, and this was told to me by Charlie Hodge, he said that before Gladys's body was put into the ground, that Elvis kissed her and said, "Mother, I would give every dime I have and even dig ditches just to have you back." Wow. That's love, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what these dark bastards do to us. That's what these people that work for MK Ultra do. That's what these people that support MK Ultra do. So go through and look at the people that you support. Do you see MK Ultra symbolism? Do you see MK Ultra tactics? Do you see butterflies? Butterflies, Monarch is a big part of MK Ultra. If you see butterflies, it's time to say goodbye. If you see a butterfly, say goodbye. And Elvis had an inscription put on Gladys's grave, and I've seen Gladys's grave. It says, "Not mine, but thy will be done." It was adorned with a cross and angels. He sent fresh flowers to her grave every week until his own death, nearly 20 years later. And it's my considered opinion after this study that having failed to bring Elvis down with a military induction, the dark, cowardly lords of the New Age went after his mother. It's my conviction, folks, that it was Gladys Presley, not Elvis Presley, but Gladys Presley, who was the first prominent national victim of Tavistock MK Ultra mind control. Gladys Presley was the first one attacked and destroyed by MK Ultra, Tavistock. It's an umbrella term, governmental mind control. And they did it to bring down Elvis Presley. And we'll go into how successful they were on it, folks. But what you've got to understand is that MK Ultra's connections to the U.S. military and to the Army specifically are very well documented. It's not a coincidence that he went into the Army, not the Navy, the Army, not the Marines, the Army, not the Air Force. Well, there wasn't an Air Force then, but you know what I'm talking about. They took him into the Army because that was MK Ultra's stronghold. And the fact that they took him to Germany is highly important because the MK Ultra mind control program, run by the Army specifically, the CIA as well, had its roots in Nazi Germany and was an outgrowth of the Project Paperclip, which brought some of the best scientific minds of Nazi Germany to America, of course. So do you really think it was mere coincidence, number one, that Elvis went into the Army? Was it mere coincidence that Elvis was taken to the very fatherland of MK Ultra and kept there as long as possible? And after his mother died, Elvis was, of course, an emotional wreck. Now, modern lore will tell you that to maintain his military bearing while on duty with the 3rd Armored Division in Germany, he was introduced to amphetamines. After discussions with people that knew Elvis, including those that lived with him in Germany, that's bullshit. Elvis had not used drugs up till then, and I don't believe he started using them simply to stay awake on guard duty. I think there's a more sinister reason for it. I think that elated at their success by deconstructing Gladys Presley, because these people are copycats, that MK's Tavistock lords applied all they learned as they turned their attack from mother to son. Now, there's little doubt that Presley did start experimenting with drugs, and it's possibly started using them while he was on active duty, but the cause of it was not laziness or slothfulness in duty, but rather the direct mental assault leveled upon him by MK Ultra Tavistock Institute. And the next time you start to make a joke about Fat Elvis, think about what happened and think about who did it. And with his mental, emotional, and spiritual state severely weakened, his diminished capacity was utilized by adding drugs to the mix to help open a route into his tortured soul that these controllers could seize upon. And history shows that over the years, Elvis, like his mother, became increasingly ill. Lots of various legitimate diagnosed ailments. He became increasingly dependent upon prescribed pharmaceuticals. And as with those of his mother, there's certainly room for speculation as to the origin of these multiple ailments. Folks, let me tell you why Elvis Presley was taking drugs. And we alluded to this a little bit on Talk is Jericho. Elvis Presley was taking drugs not because he was a junkie, but Elvis his autopsy revealed that he had suffered at least 3 heart attacks prior to the one that killed him. Elvis had pernicious anemia stemming from liver disease. Elvis had pernicious anemia stemming from liver disease. And coincidentally, it's the same thing that killed Gladys Presley. He had erythematous and systemic lupus, a painful, deadly disease. And there's both an outer epidermal form of it and the type that affects the internal organs. Elvis had both of these. Elvis had hypertension and high blood pressure. He had diabetes. He had insomnia, a chronic hereditary clinical disorder. He had glaucoma, extremely painful eye condition. He had cluster and migraine headaches. He had an obstructed colon, which was severe constipation. Elvis was born with a deformed colon. It wasn't a junkie's colon, as some have accused. He was born with that deformity. He had multiple microfractures in his spine, compressed spinal fractures. I've been told by men that were on stage with Elvis that he was in agony, but he would not cancel shows because he loved his fans so much. The guy performed with a broken back. He had severe artery deterioration. He had a suppressed immune system. So yeah, he took a lot of drugs because he had a lot of diseases and ailments. And I have to say that a lot of these came from a group of mind control specialists with roots in Nazi Germany. And I'll say as we close this show that not only was Gladys Presley killed by MK Tavistock, ultra mind control, so was Elvis Presley. We're talking about the assault on Aquarius, angels and demons. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty. This is Unindoctrinate. And we'll see you again tomorrow night.